Over 100 years ago, a national movement took place that became known as the Celtic Revival. It turned to Ireland's past to create a future sense of Irish identity, embracing many areas of Irish life: literature, painting, sports, and the Irish language. At the heart of the revival were some remarkable individuals. This is the story of one of them.
I've acted here at the Abbey, our National Theatre, many times. And every time I come here, whether it's to perform or to rehearse or to see a play, I always stop at this portrait to salute a great heroine of mine, Lady Augusta Gregory, co-founder of the theatre. She's a woman of real courage and vision, a mighty dreamer. George Bernard Shaw believed her one of the great women of her generation. But in many ways, she was an unlikely person to lead a national movement in Ireland.
So who was Augusta Gregory? Her hometown was Gort in County Galway, and her memory is honoured in the Kiltartan Museum here. It was originally built as a school and was designed by her brother. It holds many insights into her early years. She was not an aristocrat, but was born into Ireland's landed gentry at Roxburgh House. Augusta Pearse, as she was then, was one of a large and lively family of 16 children and was educated at home.
Hello, ladies.
How are you? How are you? Very welcome to Kiltartan.
Thank you very much.
Here was a woman who was born into a strong unionist background. She belonged to a very large family. The youngest daughter, not the most important one, at least her mother didn't think so. So she would have a governess, and there was great emphasis then on religion and on the Bible. Her mother was very particular that way. And of course, girls weren't supposed to learn too much, you know.
Augusta Pearse married, but not until she was 28, which was considered a late age in those days. Her husband, Sir William Gregory, was almost 35 years older.
He gave her a world view. He was a statesman, had been an MP, and was governor of Sri Lanka or Ceylon before that. He was an imperialist. He didn't believe in a home rule, but he definitely believed in tenant right and had very good relations with his tenants in that way. And certainly very good relations with the local Catholic clergy.
He's a very cultured man, very well-travelled, very curious, very open-minded, very interested in art and literature. He's part of the sort of cultural elite in many ways, as well as the political elite. So for Augusta Gregory, he's a kind of father figure. He encourages her. He opens up her mind and her experience artistically in terms of travel, and also to political questions. So her mind is open enough to be able to change, and she does owe some of that to him as well.
Her husband also encouraged her to write, whether it was letters to newspapers or published pamphlets. When Sir William died in 1892, he left his widow 2 parting gifts: the means to live an independent life, and Coole Park, the house that would become a hub of the Celtic Revival. Augusta moved with her young son Robert to her husband's estate in the west of Ireland. Coole Park must have seemed a far cry from the glamorous and exotic world that she had travelled in her 12 years with Sir William.
She was 40 when she returned here, but her life was about to enter its most creative and exciting phase. She'd arrived back in Ireland at what proved to be a turning point in its history,
which she later explained in these terms. I would trace the intellectual movement back to the moment after Parnell's death. For 12 years before he died, the whole imagination of Irishmen was taken up with the land war. There was nothing else thought of but the farmer and the landlord, the one pitted against the other. After Parnell's death, his party broke. It was pretty much like the disbanding of an army. They had lost the keenness of the fight. And then the imagination of Irishmen looked about for something to pitch on. And that imagination turned to this dramatic form, rather than to novels or poems.
The Celtic Revival, in some ways, was an attempt to answer a question that we're still struggling with, which is, what is it to be Irish? A negative definition of Irishness really lies behind the Celtic Revival. What it really does is it says, well, Irishness must be whatever Englishness is not. And Englishness is urban, industrial, rational, scientific. So Irishness, therefore, must be rural, agricultural, traditional, and a kind of a challenge to the rationalist mindset. It must be open to the idea of the otherworldly. And to give it form, you have to engage with a theatre, with writing, with language, with sport, with design, with fashion. It has to operate on all of these kinds of levels at once.
In 1896, Lady Gregory met the poet, William Butler Yeats. They could not know it, but their meeting was to change both of their lives. And it would also have a profound effect on the future literary and social history of Ireland.
Lady Gregory saw in Yeats the sort of embodiment of this spirit, this genius that was different, that was distinctive, that was energetic, that was young. I think you have to remember that what she's looking for isn't just a way of being Irish that harks back, but also something that has a kind of forward-looking energy. So for her, that spark is obviously very alluring. She's very attracted to him. What does he see in her? Well, of course, he sees in her enormous class attraction. I mean, Yeats, for all his later projection of himself as a member of the Anglo-Irish ascendancy, is not, but he wants to be connected to it. I mean, Yeats is a snob. And she is, after all, Lady Gregory. That's important to him. But also, of course, he realizes, I think, pretty quickly that she's a very talented woman. She's a woman of enormous focus, of enormous dedication. And she's really serious about him. I mean, she's not just another lady at a salon, who's going to be charmed and taken in by him. She's someone who recognizes his seriousness, who actually sees that this is a project. And it very clearly becomes the case that this is a collaboration. It's an intellectual collaboration, a spiritual collaboration, an artistic collaboration, and a personal collaboration. And it's one of the most important friendships in modern Irish history.
Lady Gregory had been introduced to Yeats by Edward Martin, a wealthy Catholic landlord. He shared Yeats's dream of establishing a national theatre in Ireland. So, in 1899, Lady Gregory, Yeats and Martin established the Irish Literary Theatre. They wanted it to be a theatre which would encourage and support Irish writing, performed by Irish actors for Irish people.
You need the theatre because it's a public space. And it's a public space where you can imagine that you can use what happens in that space to alter the consciousness of the nation. The point of it is enormously ambitious, which is we're actually going to get inside your head. We're going to change the way you think about being Irish. And out of this, some kind of spiritual revolution is going to happen. And Lady Gregory, although she's a very practical woman, it's easy to forget that she's just as deeply committed to an imaginative and spiritual revolution as Yeats is.
Their first production was staged in Great Brunswick Street, now Pearse Street, in Dublin. It was written by Yeats and was called The Countess Kathleen.
The play essentially has a kind of Irish aristocratic lady who sells her soul to the devil in order to save the tenantry from famine. And then, in the end, she's kind of forgiven. The devil doesn't get to seize her soul because she did it in a good cause.
It proved an historic performance, but the play wasn't welcomed by everyone. In fact, it was condemned as un-Irish and anti-Catholic by some nationalists. And Padraig Pearse's response to the new dramatic movement was that it should be strangled at birth.
Pearse is basically saying, who are these people? Are they really Irish at all? What are they trying to do? What they're trying to do is to sort of capture a sense of Irishness for themselves and to reshape it in their own way, with their own peculiar mixture of Protestantism and paganism, with their own sense of the aristocracy as being the people who really have the nobility, who can save the peasantry. What Pearse is really thinking is, well, it's up to the peasantry to save itself. We don't need you people coming along telling us what our values are. We don't need you as our salvation. And what Pearse is concerned with really is that there's a struggle here over who's going to control this process of redefinition of what Irishness is. He wants it to be a process which is driven by Catholic, Gaelic, rural people. And that power struggle really does play out over the Countess Kathleen.
But apologise for her roots this woman would not. From an early age, Augusta Gregory had set about mastering the Irish language and gathering stories and folklore, both in Irish and in English.
Yeats never successfully learned Irish. She did. The local people said she hadn't the bloss, as they say, but she was a very good translator. The relationship was mutual in the sense that he benefited from her love of folklore. She brought him around in the Pony and Trap and gathered huge amount of stories. Sometimes Yeats was with her, sometimes he wasn't.
Lady Gregory translated her material into what became known as Kiltartanese, a vibrant dialect that she created and that she thought fell somewhere between standard English and the Irish language.
I remember, I think in one of her plays, somebody comes in and says, I to be sitting here and she to come in and say to me, you know, in Irish that would be fine, but in English it wasn't. See, what was perfect in Irish wouldn't be correct, wouldn't be the Queen's English, let's say.
Lady Gregory's language is actually really interesting. You know, she was inventing a language, perhaps, which is this mixture of Irish and English. And it has an energy which comes out of that mixture. It works on stage. You know, it has a real kind of vitality to it.
She was a pioneer. She was bringing the language of the people onto the stage of the National Theatre.
One of the things that appeals to me about Lady Gregory is that she wasn't a theatrical snob. She wanted her work to appeal to a broad audience. In fact, she was even attracted to the world of burlesque and the music hall. Had I not become interested in the Gaelic movement, I should doubtless have turned my attention to the music halls of England. The music halls appealed to me because they reach such an enormous audience. All of the poorer members of society who are financially unable to patronise the first-class theatres. Like the rest of us, they want to be entertained. Last summer, one or two of my own pieces were done in music halls with results that were equal to my hopes. That little experience confirmed my earlier opinion in the practicality of working in vaudeville. In 1901, the Irish Literary Theatre ran out of Edward Martin's funds. But the desire of Yeats and Lady Gregory to create an Irish theatre did not diminish. In 1903, they made their second attempt when they established the Irish National Theatre Society. They had the financial support of Annie Horniman, a wealthy Englishwoman, which meant that they were able to move into a new building in Great Abbey Street, the street which gave the new theatre its name.
You can describe Augusta Gregory as the centre of a salon, as a writer, as a producer, but actually a theatre maker, which is a more modern term, is basically what she was. She had an amazing sense of marketing, for one thing, and social networking. And I love the fact that after one of the shows, she had a tea party on the stage of the Abbey. And that was a great way of, you know, meet the makers, would be how we describe it nowadays, but also just being in the centre of a social world. And the personality of the woman must have been a huge kind of draw to that social circle.
There were three directors of the new theatre, Lady Gregory, Yeats and J.M. Singh, and each brought different talents to the Abbey.
That triangle of Yeats, Singh, Lady Gregory in the National Theatre, it just happens to be one of those great confluences of different imaginations. So Yeats brings the enormous ambition. This huge spiritual ambition where, you know, he just doesn't see it as a little theatre, he sees it as a sort of centre of the reinvention of humanity, you know, that this is going to change the way people are. Sing brings the kind of counterbalancing weight to that, which is a kind of realism, a kind of comic, ironic, violent realism. And in a way, it's Lady Gregory who holds the ring, who actually creates the context in which these very opposite imaginations can spark off each other and can produce something which is bigger than either of them, but is actually a kind of synthesis of all of that. And if you don't have her to bring that sort of skeptical social side of Sing together with the imaginative, ambitious side of Yeats, you really don't have the National Theatre.
Lady Gregory divided her time between Dublin and Gort. In Gort, she was still a landlord and much involved with the local community.
She wasn't a wealthy woman. They inherited a huge debt in Coole. So she needed to write. She needed to do something to keep this estate afloat. She was a wonderful woman, the way she managed the estate. She was a woman of the world. She was able to invite anyone and everyone to Coole Park, and they came from all classes and creeds.
Coole Park became a hub of creativity, with guests like George Bernard Shaw, Douglas Hyde, and George Moore, as well as Yeats. In Dublin, she was actively involved in all aspects of theatre production in the Abbey. She even acted in productions. To some, she seemed a very strong-willed, some might even say domineering woman.
I think there are two Lady Gregorys, and one is the slightly uncomfortable personality that you sense was dealing with actors and being, you know, part of the metropolitan rush. But you kind of feel that the part of her that she liked more was the one who was the country woman, and that's actually the artist.
In 1904, Yeats collaborated with Lady Gregory to write a play that proved wildly popular with Irish Ireland. That play was Kathleen Ní Shúilleabháin.
If you talk to people about the founding moments of Irish cultural nationalism, Kathleen Ní Shúilleabháin is a huge moment in that. If you read the statements of the people who went out to fight in 1916, they talk about Kathleen Ní Shúilleabháin, you know, as a key moment for them. And everybody talks about it as Yeats's play. I mean, Yeats talks about it as Yeats's play. Did that play of mine send out certain men, the English shot? Well, actually, it wasn't your play. It was mostly Lady Gregory's play. We know that the bulk of that play was written by Lady Gregory. And yet she has this self-sacrificing attitude that the serious bits of that play, the sort of the big, rhetorical, poetic moments will be written by Yeats, and she'll do the dialogue, you know. And she does, to some extent, sell herself quite short as a writer. But actually, a lot of her plays have enormous energy. They are actually funny.
While her plays proved popular, those of her fellow director, John Millington Synge, often seemed too provocative and perhaps too insightful for some audiences.
There had been opposition to Synge's first plays, including The Shadow of the Glen, from radical nationalists, or Irish Irelanders as they were known, and also from some of the Abbey actors who thought his work too sexual in its themes. This simmering tension was to boil over when the Abbey first produced Synge's The Playboy of the Western World. Yeats was away on the first night, and Lady Gregory sent him a telegram saying, "The audience has broken up in disorder at mention of the word shift."
Lady Gregory gave unwavering support to Synge and Yeats in public, even though that resulted in a boycott of Coole House by some of the people of Gort.
She admitted herself she didn't care for the play, but on principle she felt she defended the right of free speech. So she, as a director of the Abbey Theatre, she hadn't any other option, I suppose, really.
When the 1916 Rising took place, the initial response of Lady Gregory, like most of the rest of the country, was fairly critical. "It is terrible to think of the executions," she wrote. "Yet it must be so. We had been at the mercy of a rabble for a long time, with no apparent policy. Then, again like the rest of the country, her views began to shift, to an extent at least, and she said she was filled with sorrow at the Dublin tragedy." The following year, she suffered a great personal tragedy when her only son, Robert, was killed in the First World War. Roxburgh House, where she had been born, was burned down by Republicans in 1922.
All that's left now are these gates. During the 1920s, she developed breast cancer. It speaks volumes about this formidable woman that she received a mastectomy with only a local anaesthetic. During the procedure, she visualised the river here at Roxburgh to help her through the operation.
Through all this, Lady Gregory remained at her post at the Abbey, where she acted as mentor to a new generation of Irish writers, notably Sean O'Casey. However, her abiding loyalty was still to Yeats.
She was a kind of anchor for Yeats. That friendship was profound and lasting, and that gender balance is fascinating, you know, because some people said that Yeats and herself had more of a son-mother relationship. You can't help feeling it was more of a proper friendship, and sibling might be closer to the mark.
When she died in May 1932, Yeats was distraught and wondered how he would cope in future without the woman who had been his strength and his conscience. Financial pressures meant the Coole Park estate had to be sold to the Irish government. In 1941, the Forestry Commission sold the house onto a private contractor for the value of the building stone. The house, once a hub of creativity, was entirely demolished. Today, only the parkland remains, along with this famous tree, on which so many leading figures in the Celtic Revival had carved their names. Sean O'Casey was one of those who was outraged at this destruction. He wrote, "All the rooms and passages are gone, and saplings root among the broken stone, for an Irish government has broken down the house and levelled it smooth for nettles to grow upon a shapeless mound. Oh, a scurvy act for an Irish government to do on the memory of one who was greater than the whole bunch of them put together and tied with string. The goddamned Philistines."
Bernard Shaw described Lady Gregory as the greatest living Irish woman, and, you know, Shaw was not easily impressed. You know, he was a sceptical figure, and I think there's a case to be made for her as one of the great Irish people of her time. She's a great founding figure. She believes in not just having ideas or having ambitions, but actually making institutions which are going to be there and are going to be part of Irish life. Gregory is a great Irish patriot.
Lady Gregory had an inner fire that drove her to become a prolific and highly regarded author of plays and books. A founder member of one of the first national theatres in the world, where she supported writers and actors and played a vital role in ensuring that the Abbey Theatre would acquire its enormous reputation. These are extraordinary achievements, but let Lady Gregory write her own epitaph.
We believe we have elevated the dignity of Ireland. We have shown the world, who knew it not, that the old culture of Ireland had not died. It was still with us. There are some who say we have hurt the cause of Home Rule. On the contrary, I believe we have helped it.